With episode 3 of the Gilded Age coming to an end, that means one thing. The trailer for episode 4 is now here, with episode 3 very much laying down the foundations of the Russells' demise, whilst also setting it up for Peggy to head down south. Let's jump into the trailer and break down all that there was to take away from it. Plus, I'll also give my theories and predictions. So let's get into it. Here is the Gilded Age Season 2 Episode 4 Trailer Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. So the trailer opened up with Agnes saying to Ada, "Marion thinks you're engaged in a full-blown flirtation. It would seem a poor return after all these years if you were to desert me now." In which Ada then responded with a shocked reaction as to what she'd just heard. To me, this makes it seem like Agnes is going to find out about Ada and Reverend Forte spending time with one another, or even just about the date that they went on to the art gallery. Although Agnes said that Marion said it, we know that she isn't one to necessarily gossip, especially to the likes of Agnes. So I think maybe somebody could have seen them out and about, and then Agnes could be twisting it slightly to make it seem more believable. The part about it being a bad investment and Ada deserting Agnes is something which is leaning into the power dynamic between the pair, and the hold that she has over her sister. It's clear to see that Agnes is the more dominant sister out of the both of them, and she asserts her authority by being cold, reserved, and passive-aggressive. And that sentence is a prime example of that. She's almost trying to guilt-trip her into making her feel bad for seeking a bit of happiness outside of the house and away from the company of herself. If Agnes is alone, she wants Ada to be alone. So this is something that I feel we will see getting developed more as the season goes on. And it may even cause a divide between the pair, because the romance is definitely blossoming. If there is a divide, it could cause Ada to feel the brunt of what Marion feels when Agnes turns on her. During this conversation, there were a couple of different shots that it was cutting between whilst they were talking. The first batch was of Ada and Reverend Forte out on some kind of date, where it looked like he'd brought her some flowers and taken her for a walk in the park. And the second was Agnes and Ada conversing over dinner. After this, we then cut to the section which we were teased about in the previous episode, the part where it seemed like Peggy was going to be heading down south, and that's exactly what's going to happen. The following shot was of a train pulling into Tuskegee, Alabama, and shortly after that we then had Mr. Fortune and Peggy meeting Mr. Washington at the station. Peggy said, "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Washington." And shortly after, it cut to a scene which looked like it was taking place later on in the day. They were all sitting around a dinner table and Mr. Washington said, "We're making incremental changes with the fights, but even bigger changes for ourselves. You don't get that by picking fights." The second part of this sentence sounded like it was taken from a different conversation, so I imagine maybe Mr. Fortune could be disagreeing with something. We know that Mr. Fortune was once an enslaved person the last time that he was down south, so in his mind he may still hold on to some of that resentment that was present from when he was last there. And Mr. Washington may be spelling it out to him that picking fights is the wrong way to go about things, and that it could essentially undo some of the progression that they've been making. The first part of the sentence very much feels like it's about Mr. Washington relaying the information over about what he's trying to achieve with the work that he's been doing, and how it's going to tie into the article that Peggy and Mr. Fortune are going to be working on. The next section that the trailer was focused on was Bertha being told that there was bad news and that the money had run out. In the opening parts of this season, we heard that the main way that the Met was going to be running in its opening few years was by operating at a loss, getting all of the big names in, driving up publicity and filling the seats in order to generate a buzz. However, it very much seems as though that plan is going to be cut short, as the money that they were planning on spending on it has already run dry, something which quite literally grounds Bertha's plan to a halt when it comes to taking on the Academy. I think this will be something that will be one arm of her unraveling. A lot of her power at the moment has come from her taking on the Academy and not being afraid of rivaling it. However, if news gets out that it's already on the verge of collapsing, word could spread, and she could be taken down a peg or two when it comes to the respect that she likes to garner. After this, we then cut to another section which was focused on Bertha, where the dialogue spoken was focused on an item in a Newport newspaper about her son Larry. The fact that it cuts to Larry and Mrs. Blaine in bed together, it makes me think that it's definitely going to be about that. It also looked like it was reporters that were asking Bertha the questions, so word has definitely travelled about the bits of fun that's been taking place between them. I was under the impression that Mrs. Blaine was the individual that was infatuated with Larry, but a commenter on my previous video called out that it could be the other way round, and I think they have a point with that. Whilst I do think Mrs. Blaine has a jealous tendency within her given the side-eye and the calling out and joking about the fact that he could have another mistress on the side, I do also think that Larry is probably getting in over his head with this one and is on the cusp of jeopardizing his family name for a fling which Mrs. Blaine may not even be taking that seriously. So it's a coupling up that's very much on the cusp of exploding and ruining things for the both of them. Mrs. Blaine could be seen as an outcast in society and damaging her name for going with somebody that's far younger than her and playing around with them. And Larry could be tarnishing the Russells' reputation because of all that he's doing with Mrs. Blaine. The next line that we had was from a scene where Bertha was saying, "I cover all your backs, but who's covering mine?" Plus, this was also intercut with a scene with Larry banging on the door of Mrs. Blaine's house. I imagine this is in response to the news getting out that she's fumbling around with somebody half her age and she's hiding away. The final feature in the trailer was focused around His Grace the Duke of Buckingham arriving and there being some kind of disruption between Mrs. Winterton, formerly Miss Turner, and Bertha Russell, with Mrs. Winterton saying, "I'll upset Mrs. George Russell if it's the last thing I do." It makes me think that she's going to be looking for ways to bring her down a peg or two. We know that she was threatening to leak what happened when she climbed into bed with George, so she could look to do that. However, with Bertha looking like she's going on the attack, she could end up announcing in that room, which is full of very important people, that Mrs. Winterton used to be her maid, which could cause disruption and for the other socialites to look down on her. War is definitely brewing between the both of them, and it's very interesting watching it develop. Whilst what I'm about to speak about wasn't featured in the trailer, I think something else that will definitely get a strong focus in the next episode will be George Russell and the battle that he's having with the union and his workers. At the end of episode 3, we saw that they said that they need to be willing to die for the working conditions to be improved, so it shows the passion that they have and the fact that they're not going to give up, adding more fuel to the fire when it comes to the wars on all fronts that the Russells are going to be facing. There are many different directions that the next episode of the show is going to go in, and I for one can't wait to see what ends up happening. So, there you have it, the Gilded Age Season 2 Episode 4 Trailer Explained. If you want to see more videos such as endings explained, theories and predictions and character breakdowns, then click on the card in the top corner, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @brainpilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What do you think will happen next? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.